Well, excellent. There's the man who's really got his finger on the pulse.
As I say, our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, joins me now from central London. Tom, how does the country react to this news?
Well, I think most of the country will be cheering a sigh of happiness, really. There's been an enormous amount of pressure over the last 48 hours. Since that story broke on Thursday night, Friday morning, the Health Secretary has been under an inordinate amount of pressure, not only from the wider country, but also privately from members of Parliament, members of that building behind me, who I've been speaking to, who have made their feelings known to Number 10. Only a few have gone public with their dissatisfaction. We heard earlier on GB News Esther McVeigh saying if she was in that position, she would resign. We also heard the member for North Norfolk, a newly elected 2019 Member of Parliament, say that Matt Hancock should go. But the overwhelming amount of pressure from Conservatives had been private. And one more thing, I think that it's not a coincidence that this is coming on Saturday evening, before the Sunday papers come out tomorrow. I wonder what more we are about to learn.
You've been at the lockdown march, the lockdown protest today. Was Matt Hancock, was that topic coming up? Were you hearing that name around you all the time? Was that adding to people's already, high temperatures?
Matt Hancock was one of the three faces on signs from people who were marching through London today. He has become, of course, a household name over the last year and a half, something that very few cabinet ministers usually get to do. But of course he's been being beamed into all of our homes for the last 16 or so months, been telling us what to do, reached dizzying heights of political notoriety. So of course he has become a big target, not only for people who have been anti-lockdown and marching today, but also a particular target of Dominic Cummings, the former advisor to Boris Johnson, who of course has been more on the in favour of lockdown side of things. This is a man who had a target on his back and fire coming from all directions.
Was this any great surprise in political circles, this sequence of events?
I think that certainly we have got used to this Number 10 standing by its ministers. So to some extent it is a surprise that this has come as soon as it has done. I mean, we have seen in previous scandals things drag on for days and weeks, months even. In the case of David Mellor, who we were speaking to earlier on GB News, who had to resign in 1992 in a similar scandal. These things normally drag out and take multiple stories and many days. This seems to be a break with tradition for this government in terms of it being a relatively quick affair of a resignation.
Could you speculate as to why things have moved so quickly? When Alistair was just saying the same, you're saying that often, traditionally, these things take much longer to work their way out. Why the speed with this one?
I think there are a number of issues. Number one, we can't ignore the fact there's a by-election on Thursday. A Labour seat, Batley and Spen, the Conservatives are hoping to take it. To what extent is this damage limitation? The other thing is we are still in the middle of a pandemic, and trust in this government is an incredibly important thing. And so the Number 10 maintaining the trust of the government is important. Having one of its main faces of those rules, breaking those rules, just is very untenable. And then I think a third reason is, of course, what Matt Hancock laid out in his resignation letter, that he needs to spend time with his family, that he's feeling that the toll, the public toll, the pressure is becoming too much. He said that he needs to spend more time with his family at this very difficult time in that opening to his resignation letter earlier today. And I wonder what more we are yet to learn in the Sunday papers tomorrow.
Thank you, Tom. Our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, that we spoke to earlier, is still with us. He joins me again from central London. Tom, any further reaction? What are you hearing from your own contacts and from the people around you just now?
Well, I think a lot of Conservative MPs are breathing a sigh of relief, really. They were dreading walking into Westminster on Monday morning and opening their email inbox to see the torrent of public complaint, because we've seen in opinion polls and more widely that people think this is not on. This is one of those issues that broke beyond the Westminster bubble and broke into non-political circles. Everyone was talking about this in the length and breadth of the country. This is something that really affected people because people have had a year and a half of misery, of making huge sacrifices, and to see the person who demanded those sacrifices be made, not making all of them himself, is just beyond the pale for too many people. So I think the political consequence of this will be relief from the Conservative Party. They'll try and refocus now on that by-election on Thursday and try and win back the 82-seat majority that they had briefly when they held Cheshire, Amersham and Hartlepool. Now, winning Batley and Spen would return the Conservatives to a sense of more buoyant government. But it is a big shame for Matt Hancock, who was, of course, on the home stretch. Terminus Day, just a little over 3 weeks now, right at the end of this huge ordeal where so many restrictions have been laid on the people of this country. The Health Secretary has been got right at the end of it. And the question I think a lot of people will be asking is, why did it take 48 hours for Matt Hancock to resign? Why not, as soon as he admitted he broke the rules, as soon as he apologised, as he did on Friday morning, why did he not resign then? What has changed in the last 48 hours?
Yes, of course. I mean, surely this isn't a story that's going to go away. No matter how they think they can release the news on a Saturday night, in advance of the Sunday papers and all the rest of it, and the upcoming by-election that you've referred to and its significance. Matt Hancock, this story, it's not going to slow down anytime soon, is it?
I think that it speaks to a wider phenomenon of lockdown. We've seen it both in the UK government, in the Welsh government, in the Scottish government. We've seen it across the world. We've seen half the Irish cabinet apologise. We've seen people who have made rules the world over fail to stick by them. I think partly that's a bit of human nature there, but also, I mean, if you're going to make these rules and expect people to follow them, you've really got to make sure that you do yourself. So this will be one of those parables. I think you're absolutely right that people refer back to as the long history of this year and a half is written in the future. This will be a significant moment and one that people look back to.
Welcome back to this unfolding story about Matt Hancock and his resignation in the last hour or so as Health Secretary. We still have Tom Harwood in central London. Tom, what are you hearing? You must be, your phone, your social media must be buzzing with input. What are you hearing? True, false, and everything in between?
It certainly is. We are expecting this evening to hear who the replacement for Matt Hancock is. This is, of course, a critical time to have a health secretary, and it's seen within government circles that it's very important to get a replacement in there quickly this evening. Now, there have been a number of names that have floated around, but the two that seem to be right at the top of the pack at the moment are Nadeem Zwahi, who, of course, is the Vaccines Minister, is seen to be very, very competent, a stable pair of hands, an ally of Boris Johnson and the MP for Stratford-on-Avon since 2010, but also the former Chancellor, Sajid Javid, who, of course, left Downing Street in a bit of a row with Dominic Cummings after the last election. Well, given that Dominic Cummings is now out of Downing Street and that Sajid Javid has very much made it clear that he would be happy to come back into government. And as Chancellor, he did also oversee some discussion around social care reform, which is, of course, a huge part of the Department of Health and Social Care brief. He's also a big name that many people are talking about tonight. So the two names that we really need to look out for is former Chancellor Sajid Javid and current Vaccines Minister Nadeem Zwahi.
Now, Tom, here in the studio, and I'm sure everywhere, people are speculating and wondering about the footage itself. There's clearly a story in the existence of that camera, the taking of the footage, the leaking of that footage. One might be entitled to expect that his department would have been screwed down pretty tight at the moment. And yet he plainly was unaware, judging by his conduct, of a camera pointed right at him. I mean, people must be speculating, surely, about how such a sequence of events could unfold.
One of the most shocking things in that piece of footage that I think we've all seen now is the Health Secretary sort of checking round the door before closing the door, thinking he was utterly alone and carrying out an adulterous act. That suggests that he did not know that he was being watched, and allies of Matt Hancock have told The Telegraph today that he doesn't believe there is a camera there, which leads us to the idea that it may not be a CCTV camera and may be a hidden camera. Now, that opens up a world of worry for not only the health department, but every government department. If a national tabloid newspaper can get its hands on video of what's going on inside a cabinet minister's office, well, who else could be watching? Who else could provide the cash in a similar way that a newspaper has to access the people at the top of this government? Could China? Could Russia? Could Iran? They have probably more money than even the Sun newspaper has in order to look at what's going on. And could it not only be the Health Secretary? Could it be the Defence Secretary? Could it be the Foreign Secretary? Could it be the Prime Minister? These are questions that I think everyone will now be asking. And I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a thorough review now going on within the corridors of power. There have been many calls over the last day to get MI5 involved. We don't have any confirmation that the spooks are getting involved and looking, but I would be very surprised if they weren't.
It's when I listen to you describing that, it's absolutely fascinating. You know, that it raises the possibility that in other offices all over Whitehall and elsewhere there are other hitherto unknown cameras, you know, pointing at people and recording information. You know, a tremor, a shiver must be running through Whitehall looking for a spine to run up.
I think that no one can really rest easy now in government and think that they're ever completely alone in any government building. It must be deeply concerning for just about every minister. But this is one of the wider aspects of the story that I think will now be discussed more now that the Health Secretary has resigned. Of course, the immediate personal issues and hypocrisy issues arouse such anger within the country. But potentially what's even more significant in the long term is the national security, but also privacy, individual privacy concerns that this now raises. And the question that I think everyone will be asking is how much further does this spread? Was this an isolated incident? Was this a rogue agent within the health department? Or is this something more systemic? And I'm sure that is a big, big worry that is now creeping across the whole machinery of government.
To change direction slightly, Tom, do you think it's in some ways a symptom of this having simply gone on for too long? After, you know, however many, more than a year of us being held in hibernation, in some kind of stasis, do you think it's inevitable that the seams start popping and the unexpected leaks start appearing? Is it just because we've been here for too long?
Well, if we remember back to before that first lockdown was announced, one of the reasons why the government took this single peak strategy, this what some people have referred to as a herd immunity by September strategy before they changed to Plan B and went into lockdown, was all the behavioural scientists were telling the government that anything more than a few weeks of lockdown will just be unacceptable to the British people. The government misjudged the length of time by which people would abide by rules. And I think that there is something there, that there is obviously a time that would come where people would be fed up of rules. This can't go on indefinitely.
Tom, can I just interrupt you there?
Over what portion of time that would be.
Tom, can I just interrupt you there? We're just hearing breaking news that Sajid Javid has been named as the successor to Matt Hancock and is, as of now, the new Health Secretary. Putting you on the spot somewhat, but what would be your reaction to that, given your previous testimony?
This is not a big surprise. He was one of those two top names that were being talked about. And of course, Sajid Javid is someone who has been out of government for just over a year, has been wanting to come back into government, but also had a big acrimonious relationship at the end of his chancellorship with Dominic Cummings. Now that Dominic Cummings is out of government, he perhaps is a better fit. There's less of that personal animosity. And of course, Boris Johnson, upon the resignation of Sajid Javid, was very, very warm to him, saying that he would welcome Sajid Javid back into government at the soonest possible point. The other thing, I suppose, is that Sajid Javid has been putting himself out in the media a lot. He was on GB News just last week with a new report and a new campaign that he's pushing through as a private member's bill in the House of Commons against child marriage. So this is someone who is keen to return to the front line of British politics, but also is someone with experience in this area. As I was saying earlier, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, he was intimately involved in some plans with regard to social care, a huge part of the Department of Health and Social Care's brief. So this is a department that will fit Sajid Javid. Sajid Javid is someone who has held two great offices of state, both the Home Department and of course, the Treasury. So this is someone who is well versed at the top of politics and will be able to slot into a large role in a large department, a public-facing department, very quickly.
Thanks for that just now, Tom. And our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, still in central London, still monitoring the situation. I think you've heard some reaction, Tom, from Dominic Cummings, am I right?
That's absolutely right. The former and controversial advisor to Boris Johnson has weighed in on the situation and has alleged that it was Carrie Johnson, the Prime Minister's wife, who made this appointment. And as I was saying earlier on this show, there is no love lost between Sajid Javid and Dominic Cummings. He has not got warm words for this appointment. Let me read you some of them now. This is what Dominic Cummings is saying. So Carrie appoints Saj. If I hadn't tricked the PM into firing Saj, we'd have had a Treasury with a useless Secretary of State, special advisors, no furlough scheme, total chaos, instead of the joint number 10 and 11 scheme, which was a big success. This was, of course, the reason why Sajid Javid stepped down as Chancellor just over a year ago. Dominic Cummings was wanting to merge the advisory teams of number 10 and number 11. Chancellor Sajid Javid would not put up with his advisors being ripped away from him, so resigned. Dominic Cummings is now alleging that that was, in fact, a Dominic Cummings scheme to trick the Prime Minister into firing Sajid Javid, who he says was useless. Dominic Cummings goes on to add that Sajid is bog standard, chasing headlines, failing and awful for the NHS. These are extraordinary words from the Prime Minister's former top advisor about this appointment tonight. He finishes his statement by saying that we need regime change. Now, this is pretty extraordinary. We knew that the relationship between Dominic Cummings and Sajid Javid was not a happy one. But for such an extraordinary statement to come out upon his appointment is really quite remarkable.
Goodness me, hell hath no fury like Dominic Cummings. Do you think is he setting about just bringing down the temple? Is he just intent on raising it to its foundations?
I think that there's probably quite a lot to that. We know that Dominic Cummings is deeply frustrated about what he wasn't able to do in number 10. He had a huge agenda for reform that he wanted to push through, not least the civil service reform, but also he had a particular view on how to deal with the pandemic that it seems like the Prime Minister disagreed with in the round. Now, he's saying that he disagrees with the way that Sajid Javid would have approached it as well. For example, the furlough scheme, he implies that Sajid Javid would have been opposed to that, whereas Rishi Sunak was in favour. These are some pretty large philosophical differences, and it's looking that Dominic Cummings is not holding back in any criticism of people that he worked with in his time in number 10. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some more messages, some more evidence from that time be put up on Dominic Cummings' blog in the next few days.
When he was in number 10, when Dominic Cummings was at the heart of things, were there rumours around that he regarded and treated everyone, that he was dripping with such contempt for figures in very senior positions? Was that widely known or known at all?
Dominic Cummings was never known as a people person, to put it mildly. There was, however, a deal of an element of fear, I think, particularly amongst advisors. There was a weekly meeting where they would sort of be dressed down by Dom, and there were those who he liked, those who he didn't, but there was really a sort of an atmosphere, to some extent, of fear amongst special advisors. People who were worried that if they put a finger wrong, put a foot wrong, they would lose their jobs. We also know that he doesn't suffer fools gladly and views some people as incompetent and some people as competent. We didn't know the extent of the loathing that it now appears through this extraordinary statement that, that he had for Sajid Javid, although we did know that they did not get on, that they had wildly differing points of view and differing worldviews, and that led to a big bust-up. But now it looks like the shoe is on the other foot. What happened, what was it, 14 months ago, maybe 16 months ago, when Sajid Javid lost his job and Dom Cummings reigned supreme, well, now that seems to have reversed entirely.
Fascinating. It's beginning to feel as if we're just at the beginning of something rather than the end of anything. It feels as if there's so much more to hear. Thanks for that just now, Tom.